Hello, everybody, and welcome to the College Night for Families of Seniors for the class of 2021. Our apologies for the clunky getting onto our link. We had some technical issues right at the very last minute that caused us to be a little nervous, but we are here now, and we can see that people are adding into our audience as we speak. My name is Chris Johnson. I am the counseling department chairperson here at Oak Park and River Forest High School. We know that the class of 2021 is going to have a very unique, unprecedented experience in the college search and application process this fall. So we are hopeful that tonight's presentation is going to help calm down some nervousness about how that process is going to go. We're hopeful to provide you with some strategies and some tools to help you and help your child as you're navigating this process. Before we get started, and before I turn everything over to Mr. Herbst, we do have a little bit of housekeeping. So all of you are on mute right now because we're in the webinar format. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a tab that says Q&A. If you are listening to the presentation tonight and you have a question you'd like to answer for our live Q&A at the end of the evening, please just type your question into the Q&A box. You have an ability to do what's called upvoting. So if someone puts a question into the Q&A box and you like that question and you also have that question, you can click on it and it will upvote that question, so that that question will rise up higher in the list of questions, and we'll be able to see that a lot of people have the same question. So as we're going through, just type in your questions. At the end of the presentation, when Mr. Herbst finishes, we will have a live Q&A. Myself, Mr. Nixon, and Ms. Ojigatu, all counselors at OPRF, will be a part of that Q&A. And we are recording this, so people will be able to watch it later if you want to go back and refer to something. At the end of the presentation, when you click out of it, you will be prompted to fill out a very short, I promise you, evaluation of this evening's presentation. Please take a few minutes to do that for us. We value what you have to say. If you have any additional questions that didn't get answered, that would be a great place to put them too. So without any further ado, again, I apologize for the technical issues, but we are in the world of technical issues these days. I would like to introduce to you Mr. Herbst, one of our veteran counselors here at OPRF, for this evening's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that introduction. Hopefully everybody can hear me clearly. As Chris said, this is unprecedented time, and I want to first welcome everybody to wherever you're zooming in from today to see this. I know we're all in a different place as we begin this year. I know you all have anxious seniors, and you as parents are anxious as well as we embark on the journey of applying to college. But I also want to recognize and reflect for a moment upon how much each of us has endured during this pandemic. And really, I recognize that everybody's coming in here in a different feeling space, and just want to offer my deepest, condolences for those who have lost loved ones, but also my commitment and our commitment as a counseling division to assisting you through this entire process, and some of which has not changed at all. In many aspects, has been slightly or greatly altered. In terms of applying to college. So welcome to tonight's presentation, and I look forward to your questions at the end. We're going to kind of start by looking at, if we go to the next slide, and just as a bit of housekeeping, I won't be controlling my slides because we want to make sure you have a clear picture. So we have a different feed for the slides. So you will hear me saying next throughout the presentation for the next slide. The 5 steps we're going to cover tonight is really centering around making that final list of colleges to apply to, determining your child's timeline for application throughout this first semester and in the second semester, completing the required sections of Naviance that would be the necessary components to prepare their materials to be sent to colleges, and then completing and submitting the applications themselves. And then finally, additional components that might be necessary to complete your applicant file as an applicant. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about making the final list. Ideally, students will have a list of approximately anywhere from 6 to 10 schools, sometimes a few less, sometimes a few more. But we do want that list to be a mix of safety, match, and reach schools. Great way to determine which schools are safety, match, and reach for your child is to use the Naviance scattergrams resource we have available. We'll discuss that with a few examples in a moment, but just to refresh everybody's memory, a safety school is a school not only which is a school that your child exceeds both the GPA and potentially the test score criteria for admission, where their achievement exceeds that in both those categories, as well as the a financial safety for students as well. So the not only that they would be able to exceed what is necessary to be admitted, but that financially that school would be a realistic option for your budget. A match school is where the student's admission criteria for the college matches up fairly well with their statistics. It's about a 50-50 chance of being admitted. They're right near the mid-range line of admission for that school. And then reach schools would be schools in which your child does not necessarily meet the average criteria for admission, be it the test scores, the GPA, or any combination of other factors. Again, choosing safety means financial safety, and also in the time of COVID, I think regional safety. We did have many students who over the summer made a different decision about where to finally attend this fall, be it because of restrictions with housing or remote learning necessities on the college campus, for a variety of factors. Sometimes having a safety close to home as a backup to fall on is a really important aspect of this. And then all the schools in which your child is going to apply should be listed in Naviance colleges I'm thinking about, which we'll discuss a little later as well. Next slide. So here's an example of an OPRF applicant right around the 50th percentile, maybe slightly higher than 50th percentile at our school. So GPA of a 3.12, and in this slide, it's an ACT of 25. But really the visual is what I want to show here more than anything, and that the scattergram indicates that University of Wisconsin-Madison is a reach school for this child because their circle, which is kind of, if you want to kind of see towards the middle there, you'll see a circle around an X. That is their profile, and you can tell that that falls beneath both the GPA and the average test score for admission. Now, this particular slide is on a weighted GPA, I believe, so that's why you see it go beyond a 4.0. But that's kind of a good visual representation. And so if your child is within those teal lines of GPA and ACT or SAT, those averages, if you're within that rectangle, then that probably means you're not quite at the point where you exceed criteria either in test score or GPA. Let's go to the next slide, please. You'll see Illinois State for this same student is a strong match. You see the circle, again, is located around a bunch of green squares, which indicates students who have been admitted from OPRF at that institution. So they slightly exceed the test score criteria for the average admission, and they're right around the midline too for GPA. The further they are to the right and above that teal horizon line, it indicates the more comfortable of a safety that school is for a student. You see very few red X's, which indicate denials. You see very few red X's beyond the midline or the midpoint of admission, and especially as you get further to the right and above those lines. Okay, next slide, please. Now, probably one of the biggest things that's changed for applicants to college, and one of the most difficult aspects of applying, is many students have been unable to set foot on college campuses to actually see if the environment and the culture fits their needs. An aspect that has really come into focus for a lot of students has been the virtual college fairs and the virtual college fair experiences that you can see in front of you on this slide. There's 4 dates in which the National Association of College Admission Counselors is hosting a large virtual event for college exploration. And you can see that those are all between now and November 8th, and there are various times, and those are Eastern time zone associated. And if you click on the nacacfair.org link, please, it will take you directly to the NACAC website. And if you scroll slightly down or click off the cookies and remark there, you can see a step-by-step process for how to sign up to attend one of those virtual college fairs. And so it tells you what to expect as well. We can go back to the last slide. Thank you, Chris. And if you can click on Strive Scan right below that. Strive Scan is a great resource also for college exploration. So if you can scroll down a little further here, you will see that Strive Scan has created a website where you can visit various schools, a list of colleges. You can see here. You can click on by state, if you will. Chris, if you kind of scroll a little further up, you can see by state. Actually, yeah, that would be if you wanted alphabetized states. That's perfectly fine. Go for that. Yeah, to go sort A to Z. Let's see what. So that one, you can see right now it's got international schools, but you can sort states from A to Z, and it will list states alphabetically. You also can look up by major and group by other fields as well, and click on institutions to view virtual fairs. So if we can scroll a little bit further up and above college details, there's a states button. If you could click on that, Chris. And we're gonna look up Illinois. So we can scroll down to Illinois, and Northwestern University should be listed there. You can click on Northwestern University, please. This is just one feature of Strive Scan that will be helpful for students and families. And you can see the web page, but if you scroll down, you'll see virtual tour. If you could click on that real quick, Chris, and I don't know if we have sound on your end, but if we do, you could kind of make sure that's on and then scroll a little bit further to click on the interactive tour just for a quick glimpse of what this looks like. It actually really is a good bird's eye snapshot as if you're walking around on the campus. And some of these are very sophisticated. We can see if it pulls up here, but if not, at least you know exactly how to get to it. And there's usually a virtual guide, an actual student kind of walks you through, but they really get into the various kind of all corners of the campus and to give you as close to a firsthand view as possible. Of course, he's standing in Lake Michigan, so maybe that's a little bit too firsthand, but thank you for that, Chris. I just wanted to show a visual. We go back to this slide now and actually go on to the next slide about college callers. So in addition to taking advantage of those virtual college visits, colleges are still visiting an OPRF virtually. And so college caller meetings, as they have in years past, will continue. They'll all be held outside of class periods. So most college caller meetings are occurring either in the morning or in that 2:30 and after slot, but they will not be scheduled during class time. So that's actually a benefit this year, is that students won't have to miss a class and get a college caller pass to be able to attend. If you'd like to and have not already signed up for the texting service for college callers, you could do that through the directions in this PowerPoint here, this slide. You can text the number, which to 81010 message at S7BC68H. If you text that message to 81010, you'll be able to be added to the remind text notifications of all the colleges and what times they're coming, usually a few days to a week before they actually are going to be arriving. College callers are a great opportunity for your child to have a personal experience, just kind of either asking questions they have about applying to that school, a little bit more about their potential major at that school, from somebody who's actually been on campus and has attended, often either has graduated there or is at least representing the college, so they know very well the ins and outs of what that school looks like. I also think colleges definitely keep track of who visits and who also virtually attends. So it shows demonstrated interest. So especially the schools that your child is considering very strongly, I think it is a really great opportunity to show demonstrated interest by showing up in various spaces to communicate with that school. They will keep record of that. And if it's between your child and another student who's applying, and that student has not showed any interest other than their application, but they have 2 or 3 opportunities in which your child has connected with that school, and their scores and file look very similar, that will probably give your child a leg up because they've showed demonstrated interest in that particular school. The next slide, if we can go to that, also shows email notifications for those of you who would prefer email notifications of the colleges that are visiting us. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what colleges seek? This has not changed much, I think, and I know many of you are anxious about how test scores are going to play into the college application, so I'm going to discuss that in detail. But largely, what colleges are looking for remains the same other than test scores. Academic rigor and an upward trend. So have students exhibited not only a rigorous schedule where they've taken challenging classes successfully and earned good grades in those courses, but have their grades and their challenges trended upward, downward, or remained the same? For some students, they chose to kind of start off a little light, then maybe dip into some honors or AP coursework sophomore, junior year. We'd want to make sure senior year maintains a similar level of rigor, or perhaps even represents their most challenging rigor. It just would be very important that the transcript indicate not only good grades, but a strong level or a high level of rigor and challenge in the areas that your child was able to pursue successfully. Competent writing ability, that is mostly shown through the essay. I think the college essay does play a huge role in a representative getting to know who your student is and what's important to them. So the writing ability is often displayed through that essay, as well as through teacher recommendation letters that might indicate your student's performance in their class and something that they might have done for a junior theme or otherwise in their course. So it would be important too that test scores, if a part of the application, as best as possible, are commensurate with the level of achievement your child has earned. So if a college sees very high ACT or SAT scores and very low GPA, that indicates a high potential, low performance profile for a student. And more colleges are seeing that as potentially a warning sign of not being able to necessarily be successful in pursuing college successfully and graduating in a timely manner. So it would be super important that test scores be commensurate with the achievement. Also, the demonstrated interest we discussed, but a degree of involvement within their school community and the community at large. Did the student do anything outside of classes? Did they get involved in extracurriculars, but did they not only get involved in extracurriculars, but activities that were meaningful to them or showed some continuity in what they value? So what the child involved in an active reflection of what they value as a person or as a student, and not necessarily being in charge of everything, but continuity. Evidence of growth throughout high school is kind of shown in several ways. Grades obviously show that, and the rigorous coursework taken each semester, but also personally, students show that through their essay, especially if they discuss resilience or other factors and struggles that they may have encountered throughout high school. The counselor recommendation also is a great place to show that growth. We have the unique gift of being able to see students grow through 4 years of high school. We see the evolution of a nervous freshman into a young adult eager to take on their world. So the personal growth a student experiences often can be reflected in the counselor letter, as well as some teacher letters, especially if the teacher taught your child as a freshman and then maybe again as an upperclassman. But teacher letters really do focus on the impact in a classroom that a student has. Within the classroom setting, what type of role do they play? And that's a unique lens that only teachers can provide. Next slide, please. So senior year testing. Colleges determine what they do with scores and score reporting. I won't get too much into super scoring versus highest composite score, but many schools do super score. and take the best individual test score and form a composite score over several tests. The highest composite score, though, is often an indication of a student who is, if that highest composite score matches their other attempts, if they've taken the test more than once, it would be super important to show that student has consistently done well. But I would encourage students, if you do have multiple tests, and many students this year across the nation will not have multiple tests to send to colleges, but if you do, I encourage sending any score that contains at least a portion or represents a portion of your best testing score. So if you scored highest on the English section of a test on one test date and the math section on another, I would send both tests so that if the college does super score, you have that benefit, but also that they can see your best representation. I would also say that for test score optional, that is a unique sort of experience this year in that more than 60% of schools that don't require standardized tests for admission for the class of 2021. That's a growing percentage. We're already at more than 60%. So I want all families to rest assured, and this website, if you click on it, which you don't need to, Chris, for right now, but fairtest.org does update with the list of schools that have went test optional or test flexible, and we'll discuss the difference between the two. But do know that a majority of colleges are not requiring standardized tests at all for admission for your senior. Next slide, please. For OPRF seniors, this is relatively new information. I don't think it's subject to change. So all seniors will be randomly assigned to sit for an SAT exam as a part of their graduation requirement. As I'm sure you all recall, the SAT exam was not able to be held last spring for juniors. So your child will have SAT date of September 23rd or October 14th. Seniors will be split evenly between those two dates. We cannot test all seniors in the building on the same date due to capacity issues and COVID, but students will be randomly assigned not by alphabet. It will be random assigning about 50% to each of those two dates. All test results for both dates will be available to students before Thanksgiving. And the SAT at this time does remain a state graduation requirement for the class of 2021, meaning taking an SAT exam is a requirement for graduation. Next slide, please. So in addition to the SAT date that all seniors will have in school, you are welcome to consider if there's a testing site that is available that is nearby or convenient to be tested at. There's an October 3rd SAT that some students are signed up for, I know, and there's also a November 7th exam. I've listed the registration deadlines, the late registration deadlines, as well as the score release dates for each of those dates for testing. Obviously, this is all subject to change, and many test dates have been canceled due to COVID. And as that continues, if that continues to happen, before we get too far into the school year, I know that colleges will continue to update their requirements when it comes to testing. Next slide. SAT is a little more difficult to, so I kind of did a snapshot here. SAT has decided to offer many more dates within the fall months. You can see 3 September dates and 4 October dates at this time, some which are on a Sunday. And that is the SAT schedule for the fall, I think in an attempt to have a lot of testing opportunities before we head too far into winter, when there might be a greater probability of test sites canceling in the winter months. There also, again, is plenty of information on the internet, and you can consult with your counselor as well if you're wondering the benefits of an SAT over an ACT. Again, this is the year where I think testing is going to really be a minimal part of most admissions. And I'm going to discuss that a little more. But if you think you might fare better with the format of an ACT, there might be an opportunity, again, not at OPRF, but to have a testing site near us at one of these fall dates. I have had some students who have scored commensurately higher, or not commensurate with their SAT score, actually higher on the ACT when comparison charts between the two scores are done, they've actually sometimes had a higher score on the ACT and chosen to use that as a part of their application instead of the SAT. The SAT is required for graduation. The ACT or the SAT could be used as a part of applying to college, or neither. Next slide, please. So test optional, what does this mean in the year of COVID-19? Well, test optional in its truest sense is that it means that students are not required to submit their SAT or ACT scores as a part of the application process. Typically what happens is other components of an application are given greater importance, such as, of course, grades, applicant essay, recommendation letters, extracurricular and leadership involvement. Those take on a higher weight. That is the truest sense of the word test optional. We've had some schools that have gone the route of test flexible, and I believe actually both of these schools have actually moved, at least Wake Forest I know has moved to being test optional for the upcoming school year. Test flexible indicates that a school wants some version of a standardized test. It may not be, not necessarily as an ACT or SAT. It could be an AP exam, a PSAT score, or an SAT subject test. They would like, they're flexible on which test is submitted. They would just like something. Again, I don't know of very many schools, and I know Wake Forest is definitely not one of those schools this year. They've moved the direction fully of test optional. Flexible is not necessarily the case for many schools that used to be. At least for this class, test flexible is trending test optional. And test blind is basically the opposite of test being required. The test scores will not even be considered during the college application process. NIU, Northern Illinois University, for this year's seniors is test blind for admission and scholarship consideration. So that is great news as a state school to take that plunge. And it's exceptionally significant because Northern has decided that often test scores serve no relevance in whether or not a student is successful once they get to their campus. So keep in mind if Northern's on your list that they are completely test blind, they don't even want you to take a test. Next slide, please. So determining your timeline, which deadline are you wanting to meet? That's the first question, I think, in terms of each of these colleges have different deadlines and different categories of applicants. So whether it be early action, priority, early decision, trying to decide which deadline you would like to meet and kind of what the benefit is of applying priority versus regular decision. And then what are the components of a complete application at that school? Many schools do not have auditions or interviews unless you're a performing arts major. Portfolios may be a supplemental piece for art schools as well. But the things that are a component at most college applications are the essay, potentially recommendation letters, and then again, SAT and ACT scores not as significantly required this year. And I believe that list is going to get even more in the direction, going more in the direction of test optional as we get further into the fall months. And so that's an encouraging sign, especially as the anxiety of whether or not your child will be able to test as many times as you'd like continues to kind of take over. Next slide, please. So some essay writing tips. We do have a workshop that at this time is scheduled for September 9th at 6:30. We do intend on keeping that time, although we do have to make sure that we have the capacity for that event. So if there's any changes to that, it will be sent out. But as of right now, September 9th at 6:30, there'll be a counseling college essay workshop event. And some of the tips, though, I will highlight just as a really quick part of this presentation. Answer the question asked and make sure you find the question that best says what you want to say, or best asks what you want to say. Definitely have somebody proofread your essay as well, and then have someone else proofread your essay. And I say that because to indicate that we really want students to have their essay read by multiple parties, because different people have different perspectives and can provide unique feedback. I definitely think it's a benefit for a student to have somebody who doesn't know them that well, but that they trust, read their essay, because that person can say how they come across from a little bit more objective of a place. So definitely getting feedback from adults and or peers, but definitely more than one person to kind of let you know how they feel about what you've written and kind of the impact it has on them, as well as, assistance with grammar, spelling, and typing, making sure that the essay is formatted correctly. Of course, that's all, the mechanics of that is all an important part as well. Keep copies of all your essays because they can come in handy, especially when it comes to scholarship applications. You will find that many scholarship questions as a part of the scholarship application will be similar to college application questions. So your essay might be able to be tweaked to fit a scholarship question need as well. Authentic voice is key. I think colleges have, over the years, many colleges have indicated that they can recognize when a student's voice doesn't match the rest of their application, the student's voice in the essay, I should say. And that usually indicates to a school that that student has been excessively coached, or perhaps somebody else had a larger part than should have been in their essay completion. So I think everybody can write an essay differently and have a different opinion, but the voice of the essay and the tone needs to be authentic to your student, so as best as possible. Next slide, please. Recommendation letters. We do respect the fact that colleges prefer confidential recommendations. So we ask students to waive the right to access recommendations from counselors. Some teachers choose to provide a copy of their letter to students that they wrote for the student as a part of their portfolio. But letters from counseling office are always confidential. And so we do ask that students waive their right to receive a copy of those letters. Colleges determine the permissible number of letters, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. They also consider the process. They also control the processing timeline because their deadlines really dictate the volume and the dates at which we must process each of these letters and write them for our students. We ask a minimum of 15 working days, so 3 weeks, 3 school weeks or work weeks processing time, given the volume of applications. We greatly appreciate more than that, but we would like at least 3 weeks. And so we do ask students to respect that 15 working day or 3 week minimum so that we can both write your letter, review your letter, and send that and all of your other materials in a timely manner. Again, we welcome early submission whenever possible. Feel free to give us way more than 3 weeks to get it all done, especially the fall dates tend to have our greatest volume of letter writing. So I think that the more advanced notice we can have for November and December deadlines, the better. Next slide, please. So with regards to requesting letters, students should ask their counselor and their teachers personally, even if virtually. So you can be both virtual and personal. So whether it's through a Zoom meeting, maybe a face-to-face over Zoom or Google Meet isn't necessarily needed, but if possible, that's great. Or at the very least, personally reaching out to the counselor or teacher and requesting or asking if they'd be willing to write you a letter, and maybe a little bit about why they would like that teacher to write a letter for them. What they feel that teacher knows about them that might be the reason why they were selected by the student. Some teachers write a certain number of letters, and then they know that that's as many as they can commit to. So please do not be offended if a teacher says, actually, I have 15 other letters to write and I just don't want to overcommit. That very often could be the case. Most teachers, though, write letters for any student who's asked them. So we do ask, though, you give them at least the 3-week window we're asking for counselors, because many teachers have a high volume, and especially teachers that teach a lot of junior year classes or senior year classes, they often get a high volume of requests from students. So please give your teachers that extra time as well. I think some students feel really nervous about just asking the teacher, and just that's going to feel kind of awkward and weird, and what if they say no? It's often a really validating experience to kind of just request a letter personally. So encourage your son or daughter to just kind of approach their teacher, to kind of use that time to kind of share a little bit about what that working relationship has meant for them as well. And then students will see when letters are submitted. They won't see the letter, but they will be able to see in Naviance what letters are, when the letter was submitted by the teacher, I should say. As we get closer to the deadlines, it's always nice to follow up. If it's two days out, maybe, or a day out from your deadline, maybe following up with a teacher if you're still seeing that it hasn't been submitted, just to remind them or to of that upcoming deadline just in case. But most teachers, especially early on in the fall, you will see a higher volume of teachers submitting their letter on Halloween for November 1st or maybe October 30th for November 1st, just because of the sheer number. It doesn't hurt that if you're close to that deadline though to send a reminder. I think that's appreciated if anything, but don't do that several times. Of course, one is enough. Next slide, please. I want to show a visual here. I don't have a full screen, but I'm going to try to read this here. So as you can see here, this is a list of student requests for teacher letters. So there's 4 colleges listed, and you can see under the college name, that's the number of letters, and this is in Naviance. That's the number of letters the college either requires, allows, or allows. So let me explain requires. So for Bates, for example, on this screen, 2 letters are required as a part of the application to Bates. They will allow 3 letters. And then the final screen, or the final indication there is how many requests have actually been made by the student. So 3 letters have been requested. And if you see in the black box there, the status is either requested, where the student has requested the letter, in progress, the teacher is working on it and has written it, and or submitted, which means the teacher has actually submitted the letter to the college. Here's what's kind of tricky, but really important. Each college that a student is applying to has different parameters around recommendation letters. So as you can see just from these schools, whether they will accept more than the amount they require is kind of dependent upon the school. So it will be very important that your student assign teachers, so to speak, to the colleges and universities that they want the teacher to write the letter for. Let me give you an example. If I have a student who's going into major in engineering and that university requires 1 letter be written by a science teacher or a physics teacher, then it would be really important, A, that the student ask a physics teacher for a letter or a science teacher, and B, that college be assigned to that teacher. If that college only accepts 2 letters, but your student is asking 3 teachers for their letters, then it's kind of based on chance whether or not the science teacher's letter will be one of those 2 letters, unless you specifically assign that science teacher to that college or university. And it's harder to explain and probably easier to walk through actually with the student. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that be aware of which colleges have limits on letters, and make sure that the colleges that only allow 1 or 2 letters are assigned to the teachers that you want to submit those letters. Because some of you may have 3 teachers that submit letters, some of you may only have 2. And some colleges, a very few number, but some colleges will only accept 1 letter. And so you have to make sure that the primary letter you want is the one that's assigned to that particular school. If you're lucky, schools won't have a limit, and you'll be able to you have your teacher send all their letters to all the schools. But it is something you want to look through one at a time, each of the colleges, to make sure that the letters get sent to the right places, and that the actual letter you need sent to that college is not locked out because it exceeds the number they'll accept. Okay, next slide, please. Athletics. So some students are pursuing Division I and Division II athletic opportunities. It's really important that student athletes register with the NCAA, and the link is there. Many students already did that at the end of junior year. But if not already registered, please complete that step ASAP. And then a transcript release form will need to be filled out for the NCAA. That is one of the boxes on the transcript release form we have that we're providing to students. And then they would submit that form to their counselor's secretary. This would be a good time for me to mention that tomorrow, your child will receive an email to a counselor session to discuss all the nuts and bolts and components of the college application process from the student perspective. So their counselor will walk through the necessary components and the to-do list, so to speak, as they're applying to colleges that they need from the students. The transcript request form is one of those components, but other aspects such as requesting the teacher letter of recommendation, requesting a counselor letter of recommendation, and any other components will all be discussed with your student in that small group session with their counselor. All of the sessions for counselors will be outside of class time. There'll be one session opportunity with each counselor at 7:45 to 8:45 in the morning, and one session opportunity from 2:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon. And your child should choose one of those sessions to attend. And the sessions will be occurring next week. Next slide, please. Okay, again, this is a little bit more on the student side, but checking the application processing status in Naviance, students are able to kind of check the status of their applications after they've been, after transcripts have been requested and teacher letters have been requested. Colleges do often send notifications after a student has submitted their application. And sometimes they send them immediately after a student submits their application as a default, saying that the transcript has not been received. Sometimes that's just not really that it hasn't been received. Sometimes it's just the college asking the student or reminding the student to be sure to request the transcript and have it sent along. But sometimes the colleges do say that the transcript has not been received and the issue is a processing backlog at the college. So they have it, they just haven't downloaded it. So please confirm with the college that it's processed the transcripts before asking counselor secretaries to kind of check on that, especially if it's been an extended period of time or a short period of time since the application was submitted. And repeated inquiries just kind of slow things down rather than speed things up. If a transcript or materials are indicated as submitted in Naviance, the counselor and the counselor secretary have submitted those materials. And especially in the age of most materials being processed electronically, they're received at the college the moment we send them. So if you are confused though or concerned and approaching a deadline in the college saying they're missing something, by all means contact your counselor or secretary. But be aware that often it is a backlog on the college end, especially as they approach their heavier deadlines because of how much they're trying to unpack virtually, so to speak, with college applications. Next slide, please. Here's processing deadlines, and I don't know why things reformatted here on this slide. Maybe it's just because it's bunched together on my screen, but deadlines, October 15th. We would like materials, so request for counselor letter, request for transcript by Friday, September 25th. That's for any school with a deadline of October 15th. Now, I do want you to keep in mind that October 15th deadlines are extremely rare. There's a handful of colleges. UNC Chapel Hill has a October 15th early action deadline, but it's not their only deadline. University of Georgia has a October 15th deadline, and maybe 2 to 3 other schools. And again, those are priority processing deadlines. Now, some students will receive a fast track application from a college or university that maybe they've indicated they were interested in. And it's not an advertised deadline, but they may say, please send us your completed application, no essay required by September 30th, but with your transcript. So in that case, your student would let their counselor know and their counselor secretary when they turn in their transcript release form that this material is being requested for a fast track specialized sort of deadline. Usually that's a school that wants to kind of, they know you're a good candidate for them for admission, and they want to admit you right away, hoping you just kind of go to their school and not look anywhere else. But often those come with no application fees as well, those fast track applications. But the vast majority, 95%, well beyond 95% of applications occur November 1st or later. And so you'll see the various deadlines: materials due for November 1st by October 9th, materials due for November 15th deadlines to our office by October 23rd, and then for December 1st due by November 6th. And finally, for January 1st or 15th, we would like all, and it really for anything possible in January or beyond, we would like those materials requested by November 30th, Monday, November 30th, which is the Monday after Thanksgiving, I believe. And let me be clear about what these deadlines are. These are requests for transcripts to be sent to your colleges and other application materials that we might need to complete, counselor forms we might need to complete. These are not deadlines. The materials deadlines are not deadlines for your child to complete their application. Those remain the same as what the college indicates. So November 1st, November 15th. Most colleges deadlines occur on a 1st or 15th of the month in the fall, but whatever those deadlines are, you have until that point to submit the student portion. We just need a 3-week ahead of time to be able to get those materials ready to have them all submitted to your college by the actual college deadline. So you don't need to be done with your essay when you request your materials. You don't need to be done with complete with your application. You just need to maybe have started the application, like listed the schools in Naviance or in Common App, and put in the request for us to get started on your supplemental materials. A good rule of thumb, if you are sending test scores to colleges, ACT or SAT, whatever they might be, request those scores be sent, if you have a score to send, request that they be sent when you turn in your materials to your counselor or secretary. So for November 15th, you turn your materials by Friday, October 23rd. A good rule of thumb is if there's anything to be ordered, any scores to be ordered, that would be a good time to do that. I'll explain a little bit more about the ordering of scores later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Naviance account that student account is linked to Common App submission. So we do guide students in our small group session that's occurring next week. We guide students how to link their Common App account to Naviance, so that those can be synchronized, and we know when Common App materials go, we can see that in Naviance. Naviance is not the way your child is going to submit their application. Naviance is the vehicle by which we submit the transcript and our counselor and teacher materials to the colleges. But if your child is applying to a Common App school, they're still going to submit their application through the Common App portal, Common App website, to those colleges. It just immediately tells us in Naviance that they've submitted those materials. So it just links so that they're synchronized, so we know the timeline by which everything is being sent. Again, all components for the Common Application, which is a increasingly high number of our applicants do use the Common Application. All components are submitted electronically. There is personalized support and questions answered by actual people through support on the website of the Common App. If there's individual questions about the application process or the different components of the Common Application. And there is also a mid-year Common App report that we send to all colleges, all Common App colleges that your student has applied to after the first semester is over. And it's a part of all Common Applications, that mid-year report. So if your child is applying to a Common App school, that school will automatically get their 7th semester transcript after the completion of the fall semester in February, usually, or the end of January. And then the final transcript for any school, Common App or otherwise, is only sent to one school. That's the destination school where your child intends to attend for fall of 2021. If that changes again afterwards over the summer, you can always request a transcript be sent to a different school, but the final transcript is the intended destination. So we apply with lots of transcripts and we end with just one going to the school of their choice. Next slide, please. So a couple updates real quick, and I'm going to focus particularly on the Common App with this update. So applicants have the opportunity on the Common App now to share how they've been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic through an optional question that is going to be common to all the applications that they send out through the portal. So that will allow students the opportunity to voice what the pandemic has, how it's impacted them in their high school career. Counselors also have the opportunity to share about how the pandemic affected our high school at large and what changes might have occurred on a more global level in our school, but also could address specific issues that may have come up with a student that is applying to college and the impact of the pandemic on them. So that is a great opportunity for additional circumstances to be addressed. And that's nice that they've added that question, I think. If you could click on the link, Chris, this is actually a really great resource on Common App's website as well. So if you could scroll down a little bit, this is actually a support page for coronavirus concerns. And so a little bit, there you go. So if you look at those arrows on the right, you can click down on the top one there, the changes to admission events, Chris. So you can see there is a connection with NACAC, the National Association of College Admission Counselors, that compiles an ongoing running list of colleges that move their deposit deadlines. This particularly, for the students who are just starting in the fall. This obviously will change and include aspects for current applicants for the class of 2021. But there's also, schools that are still accepting applications that normally wouldn't be. That's listed here. I know there's going to be updated aspects here for applicants for the class of 2021. SAT and AP updates as well as ACT updates. If you could click on the SAT one, Chris, real quick. The latest, and you don't need to click on the next link, but the College Board on SAT testing, the latest publications about testing is listed there and will be updated and has been updated throughout the summer. So this is a great place to go for various updates and how it impacts your child's application and various aspects of it. So another place to find relevant and timely information. Thank you, Chris. You can go back to the slide. And next one, please. Okay, real quickly, the discipline section of the Common App is the discipline record can sometimes be required by a college. I will tell you very clearly that OPRF counselors do not report any disciplinary information, no disciplinary infractions, suspensions, expulsions, nothing at all about a student's disciplinary history. We always encourage students to be honest, forthright, or forthcoming about their history and maybe explain kind of how they maybe grew from that experience or how it transformed them in a good way. We don't ask that students consider not representing themselves honestly, but we do want to just let you know that it's not an aspect of the application that we give input on. There are a few colleges within the Common Application pool of schools that do compel a student to release their disciplinary record as a condition of admissions. That is usually something that they have as a supplemental form that needs to be signed often, that a student does voluntarily, quote unquote, decide to release their disciplinary record for that school. Otherwise, this school won't form an admissions decision on them. That's only a handful of schools, but that list does grow a little bit each year. So it could be an expectation for various universities and colleges. And again, I encourage reporting to be honest and accurate. And you can talk with your counselor if there's concerns about how that might be represented in your application, any sort of history you might have had with a disciplinary infraction or setbacks within your high school career, and how to work that through. Just like anything else, try not to wait to the last minute to submit your application, the eve of the deadline. That's usually when systems like Naviance and Common Application do feel overloaded. We didn't have any major outages last year, but sometimes we do lose contact with the system a little bit right around the deadline as it gets overloaded. So I would encourage students to try to submit well before the eve of the deadline, although you do have until that evening of the actual deadline date. You're encouraged to submit sooner if you're done. Next slide, please. I'm going to just briefly, again, all this is going to be covered in the student session with their counselor. These are the different deadlines and terminology around deadlines for college applications. Early decision is not always November 1st. That's a good example, though, of a typical early decision deadline. And remember, early decision is a binding agreement. The student must attend the school if they're admitted. It's basically you're marrying that school. You cannot decide to, in fact, all of your other applications are withdrawn if you are admitted to an early decision institution. So you don't usually find out the admissions decision on any other school. Often early decision is something not to be taken lightly. So if you're considering applying to a school early decision in a binding way, please consult with your counselor and have that conversation to make sure it's the right choice. Early action is sometimes confused with early decision. That is an early round deadline. Sometimes it's called priority deadline, typically within November or December. And it incentivizes students applying early, showing that they're enthusiastic about applying, they have all their stuff together, and an admissions decision often comes sooner, usually 4 to 6 weeks after the early action deadline. Sometimes a little longer though, but it usually does come significantly sooner than the regular action deadline. The regular deadline tends to be late December or January, and admissions decisions tend to be in late March or early April. And the regular deadline isn't a bad deadline at all. Sometimes it's the only deadline at the school. And so that is typically the last round of decision making if there is more than one. And that is something to be aware of, again, whether or not to apply early versus regular. My rule of thumb tends to be that if you have what you need to apply, priority or early action not binding, so early action but not binding you, I encourage students to always meet the priority or early action deadlines to show their enthusiasm, to show that they hit the ground running, and just to know what schools they have to choose between that have admitted them in a timely manner. So they have more time to really kind of decide between schools if they get their decisions sooner. That being said, there are some very legitimate reasons to wait until a regular deadline. Partly, sometimes it's just because you didn't really know you wanted to apply to that school yet in the earlier round. But also it could be because you really want to show a strong performance in the fall. And in past years, the test scores, wanting to get a higher test score has been a factor. Students wanted to make sure to take an extra exam in November so that they could send before the college reviewed their application. I will say that, again, not a lot changes between the early action deadline and the regular decision deadline. Often we don't even have first semester grades yet by the regular decision deadline, so the college might not know any more about you by waiting. And again, in this year with uncertainty around testing dates and test scores and how often you'll be able to test, I don't know that ACT or SAT scores are a good reason to wait. Just given the fact, unless you don't have an exam at all or a test score at all yet, and it's strongly encouraged by the college to have one on file. I think, again, this is going to be an individual decision. It's going to require some conversation. But the one thing I'm going to guarantee is that the early round deadlines and how test scores play into those deadlines is going to continue to evolve. And as it's evolved the last 6 months, it's always evolving in favor of the student. Giving them more leeway, more flexibility, and more understanding when it comes to the ability to even test. Most of the nation is very much in the same situation we're in, which is seniors that did not take an SAT exam at school junior year, and maybe did not get a chance to take one at all. So this is not a minority decision. This is very much a majority decision. And so their policies are becoming increasingly more flexible as a result. Next slide, please. Again, enrollment decisions. Your child will either get an acceptance, a denial, or deferral at the end of the decision when the decision is released. For accepted, obviously, they're admitted to the school. If they're denied, there is no other pool they're put into. They're just offered a goodbye letter, so to speak. Deferred, though, especially for the early round, would put your child into a regular decision pool, move them from early action to a regular decision. That means that it's a wait and see. Maybe the student was not really as impressive as some of the other early round applicants, but in the regular decision pool, they might look a little bit more impressive and might stand out a little better. So they're not certain. Students don't get deferred if it's a denial. So students often will say, like, I got deferred. Well, they're deferring you because you do have a chance of getting in. They'd outright deny you if they felt like you didn't qualify for admission. So a deferral just delays the time at which you find out. Sometimes wait lists happen as well, where a student is waitlisted. And obviously last year with the pandemic, a lot of students were taken off the wait list because of various circumstances changing about students' attendance at different universities. So for many schools, they went quite liberally to the wait list after May 1st. So a wait list can always be an opportunity, especially if it's a school you're very much still wanting to go to. Being waitlisted could provide you an opportunity to maybe at the last minute be admitted to that school, and you should accept the wait list if that's something you'd want to do. May 1st is, as of right now, the decision date for when you need to tell the college that you want to attend. This date was altered at most schools last year because of the pandemic, and we'll have to wait and see if it changes this year. But on a typical year, May 1st is the universal deadline where you need to declare which school you're going to attend. And after that point, the school can release your seat if you do not let them know, or if you turn them down. But May 1st, again, may be a flexible date depending on where things are at. But as of right now, that still should be thought of as the decision date for you to decide on the school. Next slide, please. Okay, real quickly, here's some examples of some alternative admissions programs or support programs. So these are all programs at, in this case, state universities, which offer extra support to students or perhaps have different admission criteria. So some students might be admitted through a chance program at Northern or a gateway program at Eastern if they don't fully meet the typical admission requirements of a student that's accepted at those schools. But they see they meet many of the requirements, and they maybe have some potential or some evidence to indicate that with the right support, they could be a successful student at that university. The Chance program and the Gateway program provide tutoring and mentoring to kind of provide an experience in which their freshman year goes hopefully more smoothly, and their transition to college and their chance of being retained at that college go way up as a result. So definitely, if you feel like you don't fully meet the stated admission requirements at these schools and other schools like them, check out these programs, because they are very much in place for an applicant who may have a few question marks, but could be a really strong candidate if they were admitted in these alternative programs. So definitely they're viable pathways. Parkland, the very last one there, is a pathway to University of Illinois. Parkland's a community college right by University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and there's a pathway to start there and then finish at UIUC, and so that's the particular program that refers to. Next slide, please. Okay, financial aid, I'm not going to get too much into, because I think with the late start I've gone a little over, and I want to leave time for questions. But I would encourage all families to fill out the FAFSA. It is the form that is required before financial aid is awarded at most schools. The FAFSA can be turned in anytime after October 1st. I would encourage families to complete the FAFSA by October 1st, or as short of amount of time after October 1st as possible. And you can go to that website and begin to start on the FAFSA and start on the forms and input the information. You obviously need your taxes to do that, the prior taxes. But that is something that definitely I would encourage, even if you think your family might not qualify for financial aid given income. There are many universities and colleges that indicate they will not award any school-based aid unless the FAFSA is completed first, and kind of any governmental or federal aid is ruled out. The CSS profile, similar to the FAFSA, it asks different questions and evaluates other aspects of potential financial resource, personal resources you might have for college. So it can be a little bit more nitty-gritty in terms of the questions it asks. Some schools require a CSS profile in addition to the FAFSA. It also is accepted after October 1st. The list of schools that require the CSS profile is available online. And again, it's not all schools. The FAFSA applies to pretty much university and anybody applying for college. The CSS profile is not required at a majority of institutions, but you do want to make sure that it's whether or not it's required at your school. The ISAC representative here, I really wanted you to know Valerie Miller. She is the ISAC rep for our region, but especially in our case, OPRF itself. And she provides free assistance. The ISAC rep position provides free assistance to families with questions about completing the FAFSA. Their goal is to make sure you're able to complete it and that you understand how to fill it out, as well as locating scholarship resources and maximizing financial aid opportunities for your child. Please, if you have any questions, she is a resource that is free, provided by the state, extremely knowledgeable, and I encourage you to contact Valerie at the email address provided there. And she does, on a typical year, visit our school, but I'm sure she could set up virtual meetings or phone conversations as well. Just make the initial contact via email to let her know you would like some assistance with some aspects of financial aid. Next, please. Our website and Naviance are two other tools or resources for scholarship searches. There is a local scholarship application that'll be due in January or February, usually end of January, early February. Those are the community scholarships. They're not necessarily as lucrative as some of the more private scholarships from universities or grant money might be, but they can be several $1,000s each, and some are renewable throughout college. So the local community scholarships are particularly for Oak Park River Forest High School students, and that application will be, and that process will be outlined a little more at the OPRF Financial Aid Night on October 7th, and through email we'll be sending out when that portal opens up to apply for local scholarships. And especially as it gets closer to closing, we will remind students to finish up their application so that they can be considered for some of those great opportunities. There's dozens of scholarships through the local, and several of the scholarships are awarded to more than one student. I also want to remind families that sometimes private colleges, due to the places that they can kind of gather money to make an attractive financial aid package for a student, they don't have the same restrictions and limitations as public universities with regards to awarding financial scholarships. So I think it's important to not assume that private colleges at the end of the day are going to cost more. Like a car, the sticker price shouldn't be what you pay at private or public schools. Often it's much less. So please do not rule out private schools, because it may be comparable in the end, even though their initial price tag is usually much higher than public universities. Often with the package of financial aid, it's not that different. And so the differences might be few. For parents and students, I think it's important that a conversation be had to define affordability. And again, that financial safety school is going to be an important aspect. But defining affordability is what is affordable for us as based on our needs. And I think having those conversations earlier rather than later is super important, because I think students are less disappointed if they kind of know what some of the unwritten agreements need to be about what school they're going to be able to attend at the end of the day. And so especially if there is limitations with regards to financial ability to pay for college, then for some school students, and I've had many of these conversations, seniors will say, I'm going to be going to whatever school gives us the most money. So, and that's a perfectly fine way to choose a college. Next slide, please. Couple websites here that are great for scholarship searching. They do the search for you. You just enter in some information about who you are. It's kind of like speed dating, but for scholarships. So you tell them your numbers, and they send you the scholarships that match your career interest, your GPA, your test score, your extracurricular interests, your employment. I've had students get a wide variety of scholarship opportunities through these organizations. They're all legit, all three of these that are here, spam free. And I encourage maybe to use an email that you don't mind getting a lot of replies to, though, because they will send batches of scholarships that match the profile that you set up there, and then you have to decide whether or not to apply to them. They do the searching for you, though. That's what's really great about these three here. Financial aid and scholarship links on college websites are super important to look at too. So each university has a financial aid section. They will also tell you there if they require a separate scholarship application, or if your scholarship consideration is just a part of your regular application. And many schools, when you apply to the college, they automatically consider you for scholarships. But at some schools, you do need to fill out a separate scholarship application, sometimes with a different deadline, to be considered for scholarships. Again, the answer for a lot of these things is it depends, right? So next slide, please. Some alternatives to colleges, and some of these will be discussed. We have another counselor presentation later on in the year. Gap year, obviously. Last year we hosted a gap year fair. If possibly we will again this year, about gap year opportunities between graduation and attending college. AmeriCorps, military service, and employment, those are all viable alternatives that many students pursue each year. Anywhere from 5 to 7% of our students choose one of these options, as well as 2-year and 4-year colleges. So we can discuss more of those in greater detail with your counselor. Next slide, please. And these are my final slides, my final points. So I know it's been long. Thank you for staying with me in the the virtual world here because I can't see your faces, and that's super hard for me. But I really want to stress a couple of things to families right now. The application process is largely unchanged. Visiting colleges, viewing colleges, getting a sense in all the 5 senses, touch, taste, and feel and smell of what colleges are like, that's changed dramatically. But the actual process to applying is largely unchanged, other than testing. Colleges are doing everything they can to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on applicants. And I think, again, as situations continue to indicate a need for increased flexibility, I have not encountered a college that has not already altered their testing and sometimes their application deadline expectations based on the shifting needs of students and families during this pandemic. And they're really trying to be as sensitive to those needs as possible. Also realize there is no one and only in this process. So there are a lot of colleges that could match up very well with your child. I think that for students, often they do hone in on the best college, and it's usually the one on their list that will be the hardest to get into, the one that they might just get through the door to being admitted. And that, for some reason, feels like the one and only place they could possibly attend. And I think there's this natural human inclination to think the hardest place for me to get into is the one that is most desirable, because it'll show that I've achieved the most. So please help your students know there is no one and only. There is a lot of great fits, and there's a lot of places they can be happy. And prepare your child for possibility of some disappointment, but also a lot of new opportunities along the way. You know, there are opportunities through those college fairs, the virtual college fairs and the StriveScan websites I indicated earlier in this presentation, where you can see colleges across the nation that you would not have been able to visit. You can see them virtually, as well as sit in on hundreds of college workshops with representatives on various topics of applying to college. So there's ways to connect that are unique to the circumstances we're facing, but will be a part of college admissions forever, because they're also great ways to connect. So know that there are some new opportunities here as well. And especially for those of you who feel like testing is not the best way to show yourself to a college, it has not been your greatest strength. This is the best time in the world to be applying to college and not be a strong test taker. There are a multitude of places that will accept you without even looking at a score, many more than years past. I can't say that enough, because I think testing causes so much high stakes anxiety that it's super important to mention that it has the lowest level of importance it's ever had in the admissions process. Finally, help your child to organize the many steps of this process, but complete none of them on their behalf. I think having a place to list all the deadline dates, all the components, virtual but also physical, to actually have a sheet of paper to have all this down, or a spreadsheet, is great. Organize everything and kind of check in with them, but complete nothing on their behalf. They have to do it themselves. We often had a saying when I first started as a counselor, like, if you can't do the application, you can't go to college. Like, you got to do it yourself. So please, as hard as it is to sometimes take a back step, especially when they're feeling overwhelmed, please continue to let them lead the way. Next slide, and this is the second to last slide here. 5 things you can do to help. Be a sounding board rather than the decision maker. Express your confidence in them and reflect back what they're kind of wrestling with, but try to just reflect back and not actually decide for them. Please do your best, like we are as counselors, to stay abreast of ever-changing procedures regarding the pandemic and how it impacts admission. People probably wouldn't know this naturally, but just because I was a counselor at the time, I can say when there's been things like Hurricane Katrina, other natural events, it's shifted admission deadlines. So although this is a much larger scale, COVID-19 has presented a larger scale that has been impacted, colleges do shift based on needs and based on the climate we're all living under. I'm just going to, not reiterate too much, but clearly allowing students to drive the process as a rite of passage, that they applied to, got in, and hopefully had some say in where they attend college. That they seek appropriate choices that match who they are and who they want to be one day, become one day. And that, really that they're the ones that can have pride of ownership of that decision, of where to apply to. So, and ensure the applicants are aware of and meet all their deadlines. Of course, again, there's a lot of moving parts, so helping them be aware is a good thing. And then again, the financial parameters and then realistic options, and having a heart-to-heart as you get further in the process of like, okay, based on where you've been admitted so far, let's talk about where things are at and which ones, a cost-benefit analysis, both financially and otherwise, of each of those admitted schools, and have conversations along the way, as well as we invite conversations as counselors if you're wrestling between different schools with your student and trying to figure out what might be the best route to go and how to navigate those final decisions. Hopefully there'll be many to choose between when all this is said and done. And the final slide, please. This is still an exciting time filled with much possibility. Can't say that enough. It's exciting even though it's stressful. And you are not alone. Your child is not alone. We are all in this together. It's cheesy, but true. We are all in this together apart, even though we're six feet apart. But we are really here as a counseling department, as individuals, to support the needs of each of your children, each of our seniors, and specifically the individual ways in which they need help navigating this process for what they're looking for and what they hope to get out of it. So please know that we should be a first stop when you're having difficulty, or you need a pep talk, or you just need to know that you're all on the right page. More than ever, we want to know how much we are here to support you and want to fulfill that obligation and that promise, because that's why we became counselors. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for spending the time. We would like to open up for a Q&A now. And again, I appreciate everybody being here and taking the time with us. So thank you.
Okay. Am I unmuted?
There we go.
There we are.
Couldn't get my.
Well, I don't know if we fully introduced ourselves. I am Carolyn Ojigatu, been a counselor at OPRF for about 18 years so far. So I've seen a lot of changes over that time.
I'm Chris Johnson. You saw me at the beginning of the presentation, if you were in the beginning of the presentation. I'm in my 17th year at Oak Park River Forest High School, and I serve as a counselor and the counseling department chair.
I'm Pete Nixon. I'm in my 16th year at Oak Park River Forest High School, and I'm delighted to be part of this panel, and we're eager to answer your questions.
Yeah, and there are a lot of good ones. Oh, Joe, well, we know
I was
who
going
you
to
are.
say, just because we're saying our years here, and I'm in my 15th year here, and glad to be serving with such esteemed colleagues. It's really been a blessing to be at OPRF.
So we've been taking a look at the questions, and we're going to start with the ones that have the greatest number of concerns. I do want to say one thing before I field questions to the panel. There have been many inquiries about Naviance and how to change information, where to add information, access, etc. The most detailed set of instructions will actually occur with the students. Mr. Herbst mentioned that we're going to have group meetings with our seniors next week, and we have a information-filled document that will answer every question about the aspects of Naviance and reiterate some of the issues that we raised this evening. So we won't go into the details so much about that, but if you do take a look in the chat, I believe the link is there to the nuts and bolts, correct? And there is information about how parents can sign into Naviance as mostly a viewer. There is also a parent questionnaire that some counselors ask their parents to utilize. So just take some time to review that document after the evening's over. Okay, so I'm gonna—
Can I add one more thing, Carolyn?
Sure.
A couple of people put questions in about whether or not you would have access to the PowerPoint presentation. And we will definitely be sending that to you. We'll send it to you in an email as an attachment and include any last minute questions or things that have come up even after we finish our Q&A. We'll also post it on the website for you.
Okay, awesome, thank you. All right, so throwing this out to the panel. Without test scores, how do you suggest that we interpret the scattergrams to identify our match and reach schools? And I want to add something to that. There were some other questions that asked specifically about unweighted versus weighted GPA. So I figured whoever answers that can include that information. So how do you use the scattergrams without a SAT or ACT score?
I have a couple thoughts. One is the most obvious thing to me at the moment is soon enough, if you haven't already gotten a PSAT score, which you took last October, it often has a projected SAT score. I know that's not the same thing and colleges will not see the actual PSAT score, but it gives you a realm to start out with in an arena and a time period where there's so much variance. And I would add to that, even though I know that it's important for doing match and reach, you can look at the grade part. And then last but not least, in a test optional world, which as Mr. Herbst correctly recorded, is the majority of schools, including the entire Ivy League and others, there's a lot of latitude. But I think it's a closer read and rigor of courses, and I'll stop talking and let my colleagues join in.
I guess I would add to that too, and I think this will capture questions that are kind of nuanced in a lot of the questions that are in the Q&A. I think it's really important for you to grill the college admissions reps themselves and ask them, because the problem with this unprecedented time that we find ourselves in is that not only is everything turned upside down, or it feels like everything's turned upside down, but every college is going to have a different answer to that. Mm-hmm. There was an article in the Tribune, some of you may have seen, where the head of admissions for U of I said, yes, we're going to be test optional. And then was posed the question, well, would it be better for a student who has a good test score to submit? And then he says, yeah, it would help. And I almost screamed because he was saying two different things. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was very confusing and very unfair. And in a time when parents and when students are really worried about how that test score is going to be impactful on their admissions, I think you're going to have to really grill the colleges on that. They need to be able to give you an answer, what that means. Will it be helpful if I do have a test score? Are you really test optional? What if other kids are putting in test scores and my kid doesn't? I think it's going to be important for you to make sure you ask that question very directly to the specific schools.
And I did want to just add one last piece about the test possible scenarios. So we had optional, test flexible, test blind. There is the school that requires something to be sent at some point, but not by the deadline of, let's say, priority deadline. If it's November 1st, I've had more than a small number of schools have said, please turn in, if you want to be a priority applicant, turn in everything by that deadline. But if your test score arrives months later or weeks later, that is perfectly fine. Do not wait on the ability to test when there are so few testing dates and places to test. Do not wait on access to being able to test to prevent you from applying. So that is another nuanced sort of option. Is at least at this point, some schools are still saying that they want something eventually, but you don't necessarily need it by the deadline. Again, many of those schools I think could go all the way to forget it, we don't need it at all. But at this point, they're saying, send it to us when you can take a test. Don't worry if it doesn't happen by the deadline for the rest of the application. Sorry, that's all.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Okay, we're going to go to the next question on the list. How do you expect the increased number of deferrals and gap years for this year's class of 2020 will affect acceptance rates when this year's seniors, 2021, apply for next year? Do you expect admissions next year to be more competitive?
Again, several thoughts come to mind. One would be, it's to the college specific. The predicate to almost all of my answers tonight will be it's to the college specific, whether it's about financial aid, testing, interviewing, virtual visits, the whole 9 yards. Having said that, a lot of what will control it, so yes, there are a certain number of schools that have allowed students to do gap years without an explanation. Some schools put a cap on that and said, no, 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 you had to do that by last spring. You can't do that now. And that's again to the college specific. I think what's going to come down to is it's an unusual year, and Mr. Herbst hit on this. I think we're going to have a lot more kids who think they want to go away. Some of my students said, I absolutely want to get out of Illinois. But if this whole situation with COVID and other things hasn't been completely resolved, that may shift a bit. So I think what's going to happen is the pools may have a different, I don't want to say configuration, because the schools that are popular remain popular. But I think there's going to be a different need. Let me give a quick vignette. A friend of mine's, it's not about my friend's brother, but this child goes as an out-of-state student, resident of Arizona, is now in Iowa. Why can't he take why should he pay out-of-state fees for an online course? We hope this is all resolved by next year, so this then becomes moot. And I understand the questions about applications, not about matriculation. But I think we have to be mindful that we don't know where things will land, and it's the not knowing that makes us feel unsettled. But there's opportunity there, and from what I've gotten and with the articles that we reviewed in preparation for this presentation, a lot of it had to do with it's going to be a much closer reading to recommendation letters, nuanced essays, thoughtful things that look like they really thought about that school, not a template answer that they farmed across 15 schools. That seems to be what my takeaway, which partially answers that question.
Okay, thank you. Next popular question. Do you have any insight on how colleges will be awarding financial aid, and I'm going to add scholarships in the absence of test scores? And the one thing I was going to say about this particular question is that the financial aid process is typically separate from the test scores. That is determined by a family's financial need. So, filling out the FAFSA or the CSS profile as the school requires is going to be critical. However, in terms of scholarships, that is going to look very different from school to school. I remember years back, when we ended up not ranking anymore, and everyone thought like, oh no, how are the scholarships going to be administered, from schools, who were using the ranks? Well, there was such a huge trend across the country of schools that no longer used class rank. So they changed their process and how they determine who seems worthy of a merit scholarship. But again, this will differ from school to school to school. So I guess I'm echoing the same thing. You need to make sure that you're looking at the fine print and checking in to see if there are changes.
Okay, on to the next question. When will we know our students' designated SAT test date? That is a very timely question. The counseling department had a meeting today with the folks in the building who coordinate standardized testing, and we are getting information on that soon. We know that we will have 2 dates. We know that students will be randomly selected for those 2 dates. So information is coming imminently. For this particular test, it is a school day test. So there's nothing that your child needs to do to register for it. The school registers for it. You don't have to sign up on the College Board site. You don't have to pay anything for it. That's all taken care of. Your student will just come and take the test on the day that they're assigned.
I would add one thing to that. The test dates that were given as the 2 test dates were determined by the state of Illinois. That was not a local decision. So we have no power to shift them. I say that because if you look closely at them, they're both B attendance days. So for teachers who teach that, they're aware that they lose that. That's not something we have any ability to change. We were assigned that as the entire state of Illinois as a decree or directive. So if there's sensitivity to that concern, that's unfortunately not anything that the school district, as far as we know, at this time has power to change.
And I'll follow up that question with a similar one. For those who are concerned about meeting early action or early decision deadlines for schools that may be looking for test scores, we were also told today that the scores will be available in the month of November. And the colleges are not, and we've read through many different websites and talked to reps already. You're like, oh, how are you treating the scores if students want to send them? Like, we don't expect them to be in by the deadline, because we know that the majority of students have not been able to take it. So it's not going to be counted against them. So just wanted to reiterate, checking the policies of the schools and see if it's even needed. I think there are other questions about, well, even if I'm applying to all test optional schools, does it benefit me to send in test scores? It might not. Ms. Johnson shared a really good example how University of Illinois stated their view of test scores. So just know that still push, and we're going to be pushing our students to go for early action deadlines, not the binding ones. But we have found that the earlier that students find out the decision of a school, the less stressed all of us in their lives are during the winter. And there are different deadlines, or different response dates rather. So often a November 1st deadline might be attached to a December 15th response date. It might be a January 1st or January 15th response date, but that's still earlier than having to wait till March or April. So that would be my recommendation about that.
And I would just add about the applying early. I think also the other additional aspect I'm going to be encouraging students is to increase the number of safeties and the range of safeties, because there may be many viable options. They may not be the attractive first choices, but having a few very solid options strategically will be a good idea, should there be an evolving nature of aspects or circumstances regarding a student's attendance and precluding their ability to attend the school of their choice, their first choice maybe. I think having a variety of safeties will make it feel like you weren't just going to that one safety that you had to have on there. I think a variety of realistic places, whereas in a prior year I may have said one or two safeties was enough. I'd say have a few more would be a good idea this year, just to have, because there might be a variety of ways in which two colleges are going to be admitting or providing compensation or financial incentive for students who exceed their admission criteria. So you may find it quite lucrative to have more safeties in place as well, financially, I should say.
And before I read the next question, I would just add, Ms. Ojigatu made a comment about stress levels in households. And we just want to let you know, we get it. We've got stress levels too. Being the people who are going to shepherd your children through this process, please reach out to your child's counselor if you've got questions. Reach out if the process is becoming ridiculously stressful, if your child needs extra support, if you need extra support, just reach out to us. We are happy to help you with that. We want the stress levels to go down. The next question is, can recommendation letters be asked for early but without knowing where the student will be applying? I would say absolutely. Mr. Herbst addressed that a little bit in his presentation, and I will be addressing that, and I'm sure all the other counselors will be too when we meet with our seniors in groups next week. Because we're doing it virtually through email, I will be sharing a little email etiquette with my seniors in terms of how to ask for a letter of recommendation, but they should be asking now. A lot of your children already asked last spring, and that's fabulous. They should reconnect with those teachers just to remind the teachers that they're on their list, but they don't have to have specific schools yet. It's only when they start getting schools into Naviance and their applications become live that we will need to know who the specific teachers are who are recommending for them, so that the teachers can post the letters in Naviance.
And I would just add that there's a questionnaire that all of us have some of us have a different way of how you route it to us, but every counselor has a questionnaire for recommendation letters. I didn't go too much into it tonight, but it will be gone into in great detail in the senior group meeting with the students. That questionnaire should be filled out, and it's a great way actually to even get to thinking about what type of essay topic you might want to have by how to answer that questionnaire. But the questionnaire is, I think, 11 or 12 questions directly as it relates to their high school experience and things that they would want us to know as we compile a letter for them as their counselor. There also is a parent questionnaire, which might be a great opportunity for parents to channel their anxiety and their lack of control a little bit into this questionnaire in terms of sharing aspects of your students' high school experience in a way that only a parent can share it. So that parent questionnaire, I've often used anecdotes and just different examples shared in that questionnaire to kind of round out my letter. So please, by all means, consider that parent questionnaire as well, and encourage your student to be very detailed in their questionnaire, and we invite you to contribute one as well. But the parent one is optional. The student one is required for a recommendation letter.
Ms. Johnson, I'm skipping a little, I'm so sorry, but I think another rec letter question is relevant right now. A number of you have asked about rec letters from outside writers. So, if your student has been in summer programs or internships, maybe a coaching situation, are those letters welcomed? Part 2 of that would be, can those letters be transmitted through Naviance? And if not, how do they become a part of the application? And then I think I'll throw a third part to that. If we are looking at teachers, is it okay to go to freshman or sophomore year teachers or senior year teachers? I think the junior year teachers are definitely well covered. But what panel, what do you have to contribute to that?
I mean, I guess I would say most students, I think, go for their junior year teachers. And I think that's a good choice. Occasionally I'll get a kid who asks about a sophomore teacher. Sometimes students are lucky and get a teacher twice. They maybe have a teacher as a freshman and a junior. That's always a nice combo. They have a teacher as also as a coach or as a club sponsor. I think that colleges are looking for current information. And sometimes, depending on how compelling that letter would be from a sophomore teacher, they want to hear how they're doing right now in their junior year. And we tell the kids, things kind of ramp up in your junior year. I always see a big jump in the academic requirements between the sophomore and junior year. So if at all possible, I would encourage it to be a junior year teacher.
I would add that so go ahead, Pete.
Go ahead, no, Mr. Herbst, please.
would just add that the additional recommender, as long as it doesn't replace the required teacher letter, the Common Application has a process by which an additional recommender outside the school could submit a letter or a statement or fill out a form for on the student's behalf. Often that's a coach, a pastor, somebody outside the school. I would say that who knows your child best? If that's a freshman year teacher, sophomore year teacher, sometimes students have a hard time thinking about who that might be, who knows them best. And some students, honestly, many of my seniors, not many, but a few of my seniors will say, I don't feel like any teacher knows me well enough to write a letter. I feel weird asking anybody. Think about the one that you felt like you could have gotten to have a good relationship with. If they didn't know you well, one that feels approachable, because that's probably the same sort of teacher that will be able to say very nice things about you. So if that is a problem or you don't feel like anybody knows you that well, think about who you felt good about. But at the very least, if you're looking for the right teacher, it's usually the one who you feel knows you maybe in more than one aspect or just seem to get you really well. And it doesn't have to be any particular year of high school.
But without going terribly deeper into the weeds, I would say two things. One is, Mr. Harp just mentioned the word about the Common App. I want to put out, and I think he put up the warning out, but I want to amplify that under no circumstances, when we are an Naviance school, And it's really important that the students often think, oh, well, I'll just accept how the teacher letter go through the Common App because the Common App has prompted me. That's not something we want you to do because that seizes up the system on a number of levels. So it should say in there, go see, it's all transmitted through Naviance. That's point one. The other thing I say is recency has power. Also, I say to kids with respect to teacher letters in particular, where did you do your best work? Your best work may not have been the class that you actually got an A in. That's what's deceiving. It could be a class where you had a C and you struggled and you went every day for help. And boy, you hung on by your teeth, but you made it. And you got so much confidence and it demonstrates tenacity and resilience and all the other things that make for a good human being and a good student and a good college completer. So colleges often want that. But all things being, in terms of the outside aspect of an outside, certainly there's an enriched aspect, but to Mr. Herbst and my other colleagues' points, it doesn't supplant what they require. If they want a counselor letter or they want a teacher letter or they want a specific letter for this year or that year, again, hate to say it, but to the college specific.
I would add to Ms. Ojigatu's list of questions about recommendation letters, there was another question about, can one letter be used for multiple school applications? Absolutely. Colleges do not, or excuse me, counselors do not write specific letters to the University of Michigan and specific letters to other schools. They're not specific about the college. When we revamp those letters later in the season for financial aid, yes, we can tailor those letters to be applicable for a specific scholarship that a student is applying for. But in terms of the recommendation letter that I write and the other counselors write, my letter will go to all of the schools. The teachers' letters will go to all the schools that the students ask them to send them to. All right, is it my turn, Ms. Ochigatu?
I think so.
Oh, okay. Let's see here. Another question about standardized testing. What if we already separately registered for an SAT in September?
Well, that's perfectly fine, and I hope it goes as as planned. The tests that we are going to hold on September 23rd and the October 14th, those are part of a state requirement, a graduation requirement. So any of these SAT or ACT exams that you're able to take on a Saturday or a Sunday or National Test Day, I guess I should just say that, this counts as an extra score. Something I do tell my students, and I think I'm especially going to drill this year, I know some of our kids are scared of having their scores go directly to colleges without being able to see the score first. But I think this is a good time to take advantage of the free score reports that can go automatically once the scores are available. So when if your student has already registered for the test, I think they should still be able to go into their account and add. I think it's like up to 4 schools for free, and then you pay for each additional school. But those score reports will go directly, and if you know for certain that you're applying to schools that will take a look at that score, or who are still saying, if you have one, send it, is this one less hoop to jump later.
And you know, I don't want to focus on multiple test dates, but it is in a normal year, it's a great thing to take more than one SAT or ACT because the chances of your score going up on a second or third attempt are quite high. So if you're in the fortunate position of having multiple testing dates and you do desire to test multiple times, then there's a good chance of the second or third attempt of being a higher score. I don't try to overemphasize that because that's a good problem to have, I guess, and it's might be a rarity to have that problem. But you can still choose to send just one of the many scores. To most colleges allow you to send whichever scores you want. There are some that require you send all your testing dates scores in, but many colleges let you choose the ones you want. I do concur with Ms. Ojigatu though that in this year, I think having a test is an amazing thing just to have a score. So to send it immediately helps things get there quicker without needing to be ordered, and you get to do that for free. So especially if you're only planning on taking it on the state day.
Yeah, something to think about. Next question. Well, I'm going to kind of combine a question, two questions. How do you actually go about requesting a transcript? And should I submit my weighted or unweighted GPA? And maybe Ms. Johnson, if you can go into the transcript, because that's new this year.
I will definitely take the transcript part of it. So new this year, and your children are going to be getting information about this in the meeting that they have with their counselor next week. We have a fillable PDF transcript release form. It is live as of today on our school website on the college and career page of the counselor section. So it can be clicked on now. We will be giving the students just kind of a run through of what they need to fill out and why they need to fill that information out on the transcript release form, and specific instructions on they have to save the form onto their computer, complete it, save it again, and then return it to the counselor secretary. And that constitutes what we normally would have a trail of kids standing at our secretary's desks with pieces of paper. We no longer do not have the pieces of paper, but the transcript release forms will be electronic. So hopefully that will ease some people's concern.
And those official transcripts they're not available yet. We've had students already asking about that. What is it, maybe second week of September, the official senior class number is set, and once we do a run of those official transcripts, the seniors will know. They should have a copy of it. We're going to talk about their transcript next week and reviewing if there are any errors, anything that's missing. We're going to go over that, and that's what we try to do in the next week or two, is to add things, or figure out what the problem is, problem solve. About the GPA, both the weighted and unweighted GPA is on the transcript, so there's no way to hide one or the other. Every college is going to interpret GPA different ways. In most cases, they toss it out the window, and they will look at specific grades in specific classes. They're going to look at the rigor. They might do their own calculation and decide that 2 years, these 2 years are the ones that this school really likes more than the this other third year. So they're going to do different things with it. There was a question about the common application, which score to report, and typically on the common app there's a drop down. I don't know the technical term, but where you choose, is it out of a 4.0 scale or a 5.0 scale or an 8.0 scale, because everyone does it so differently. Our students do have to put in their unweighted because there is no other option that matches our grading. So we've got a 4.0 unweighted GPA, and so they're going to report that. And that's okay, because the colleges are going to see everything on the transcript. No test scores on transcripts, though. So that was another question that came up. And like I said, that will be part of our discussion with the kids next week.
I will mention in increased flexibility, there are many colleges that will allow students to self-report their ACT or SAT score. So even though they won't be on the transcript, an increasing number of colleges will allow students to self-report, and only if the student is accepted and attends that school do they have to send the official score report. It used to be just a couple of schools, a good number do that now. So you may want to, again, check the individual college website, save a little bit of money. If you can self-report, you can do that super quickly, obviously, once you get the score. And then, again, only have to send it once to the school if you're going to actually attend that university. And the answers to all these things, like has been said, it really depends on the school, but we can identify trends and tendencies, and then the research in between the weeds is really each student's and families to do with our assistance, of course.
Right.
All right, next question. In Naviance, is there a way to edit the list of colleges that kids are thinking about, specifically deleting schools that were previously indicated as thinking about schools? Yes, they can definitely delete from their thinking about list. And I'm glad that this question was asked, because it brings up another question that kids always have. If I had a penny for every email from a kid, I could retire. So what your son or daughter needs to do is enter the schools that they're thinking about, enter the schools they want to apply to into colleges I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
They are not active applications until we move them over to the colleges I'm applying to. It's because it says colleges I'm applying to, I think kids naturally assume,
Mm-hmm.
I can see why,
Right.
that they should be dumping it into that place. They don't have the ability to add an active college into colleges I'm applying to. So all of the schools your child is going to apply to should go into colleges I'm thinking about. And that list, I have kids who have 200 schools on that list. They can hang there. They don't have to delete them if they don't want to, but they are deletable. There's a button for them to be able to delete them. And I think they can actually delete them en masse too.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully that message will get across when we talk to the kids next week too.
Okay. I do see a question about requesting the September 23rd versus the October 14th test. I don't recall if that was answered earlier, but yeah.
I mean, my understanding from our conversations with the district and how they're going to be allocated, as Mr. Herbst aptly said, they're going to be assigned and they'll be randomly assigned. So you can't really request. It just in terms of fairness, and it's not going to be based on, my understanding is also it will not be on the basis of surname and alphabet. It's just, and so we don't know more than that because the particulars are still being worked out. But please rest assured that the backstory to that, the question behind that question that I always think of and is often posed is, what if I don't get the earlier test day? What's going to happen to me? And the answer is nothing of consequence in almost every case. Number one, because both test results will generate a timely test result for even early action and early admissions from November 1st onward. Secondly, most schools, as we've already hammered away, are being so test optional and so test flexible that they're going to understand if there's a delay, much less if you don't turn one in. So there's really no harm to getting the October versus the September date. If there were a specific thing where it was a recruited athlete, but even that, the work is done behind the scenes and they're understanding. So I've heard of no examples where a student would ever be penalized, particularly in the state of Illinois, for if they're, every student in the state of Illinois may not have had the opportunity to take the test until those dates. Again, they're state determined dates. So they're all in the same pool, and the United States universities are not going to ignore the state of Illinois applicants. So I'm very confident saying it's not an issue.
And if I could say the flip side of that, from an admissions perspective, in a self-centered way, it doesn't behoove any college to lower their number of early round applicants because of this test score and decrease that pool, because early admissions gives them early numbers of potential yield. It helps everybody for them to be flexible with regards to that deadline. Usually in the past as well, when we look at November 1st and November 15th, you know, students have been concerned at times because they're like, well, that teacher letter didn't get there by November 1st, or I don't see it submitted, or my test scores haven't arrived from ACT or SAT College Board. What do I do? That's your deadline. You can't miss that deadline. You can't miss November 1st, you know, for submitting that you have applied there and finishing all of your components. Most colleges, even in the past, allowed some leeway. Not everyone, but most did allow leeway for when the supplemental materials trickled in. Because you may have decided to apply to Stanford the day before the deadline. They wouldn't have expected your high school to send everything out to Stanford that night when you had your, you know, awakening. So, so even in the past, there was some flexibility with supplements, even more so now. If you believe there's a circumstance that you're gonna be penalized for, by all means, your counselor would want to assist in communicating with that college or that organization to discuss, you know, the realities of whether or not there's an impact. So if you need assistance to address specific situations, let us know, because we know of none that will be negatively impacted by either date. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Next question is a short Naviance question. Can we access Naviance as parents? Yes, you can. The instructions for how to do that, I believe, are in the nuts and bolts It was shared with you in the chat or the Q&A earlier this evening. Know that your access to Naviance is read-only, so you are able to see what your child has written in Naviance. You're able to fill out your parent questionnaire, but it's read-only access for the things that have to do with your student.
Have a question here about, oh, it just escaped me, but it was about gap year. Sorry, don't want to. If a student is considering a gap year, what are the pros and cons of applying this fall compared to applying in the fall of 2021?
So I'll approach that one to start out with. Number one, applying to a gap year has become increasingly popular as a trend as students seek a year to mature, save money, do something different. So that would not be an unusual circumstance in a year where we weren't in a pandemic. I always say to my students, and again, the panelists may have different opinions, it's best to apply while everybody knows you and you're in the system, and you're going to feel better about a couple of things. First of all, you're part of the main flow. If you're in the college applying, I want to be very clear, there are always obviously post-secondary options that don't include college. Google's famous just recently getting these certificates that are very inexpensive and pay high-paying jobs. There are a lot of other things happening in the world. But if one is convinced that they want to apply to college, not only is it a peer thing where your peers are all doing it now because it's the age and stage at which one would do it, but beyond that, it's also about, that's when they have access to Naviance, because you lose access to Naviance when you graduate. And your teachers are all knowing you and are aware of you. Everything is at hand. It's so easy to do comparatively. Obviously, there are some challenges that one faces a little bit because we're remote. But at the end of the day, it's still part of the cohort. It's what everyone is thinking about who is applying to college. I want to say it's quite all right not to. So in terms of applying to a gap year, the other thing to say is that a lot of times kids have a lot of ideas about gap years. They apply to college. You have something in your pocket at the end of the process that, okay, I've got a college option. If you don't apply to college and your gap year doesn't pan out, or you can't afford it, or that country becomes closed to you because there's a pandemic and they're not letting people from the United States go there, or whatever it may be, or that state isn't allowing, then suddenly your gap year is foreclosed in a way that you didn't anticipate. It's nice to always have a college option. It relieves pressure. That's my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Next question is another Naviance question. How do you actually go about linking your Common App to Naviance?
Go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
We will be addressing that with kids specifically next week. It's a pretty easy process. Students have a page in Naviance that will pop up when they go to the college portion of Naviance, and they have to enter, their birth date is preloaded into that page, but they have to enter the email address that they use in the Common App. It can be their school email address, it can be their personal email address, but they have to make sure that what they're putting into Naviance is what matches what's in Common App. They click a button, the little blue wheel spins around, and then magically it's linked so that when we send the application materials, they go directly to the schools. Joe, you might want to add something to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's important that students, it was two quick things. It's important that students attend that small group meeting because there will be a lot of nuts and bolts shared there. And I tried to just overview it tonight because I still couldn't get under an hour with just what I was trying to share. But the aspects that involve their actions really are covered in great detail in a much more practical, for lack of a better way to put it, meeting in that small group meeting. It's probably the most important small group meeting with their counselor of their high school career, because you get so much information at that session about that later on, and a great little resource guide too, that later on you'll be like, oh man, I didn't know I need to order test scores, or I didn't know I needed to match my accounts. And then it's 11 p.m. on a Thursday and you want your counselor to send things and things aren't matched. So as far as like all of the details of what students need to do, they just weren't shared in detail in this session because this was really about sharing the overview with parents. But in prior years, we sometimes had this occur the same day as the group meeting. So parents are on at night and their students attended the group during the day, but we try to link them up close together. So next week they will get all the mechanics of their contributions to the application process. And I'm sure some of you will be logging in from a distance, folding laundry, or working on something else and hearing what's going on. So that's the other benefit of remote presentation, I guess.
Next question. Have any of you spoken to admissions counselors and given any anecdotal insight as to what they're actually going to do?
Yes, and not yes, but yes, and they would say, the ones I've spoken to would say, they're doing as much, the ones who are holistic are being even more so. I think they're very aware that these are unusual times. They are also reading their applications with youngsters perhaps running around who are schooling at home remotely, facing their own challenges of how to do college visits remotely. So a lot of what they're facing about what they're going to do can be partly technological, partly systematic in terms, but I know people want the great insight, like, well, if I just do this, I'll get in. And that has not been what they focused on. And may I also say it's early in the season, I have not spoken to many, but the reality is that they're trying to be as thoughtful as they can be. They're trying to be as fair as they can be and humane, mindful that there's so much tension and uncertainty. That's what I would say.
And I would use just an example. This is right now, it seems like a one-time deal that a lot of schools are saying test optional because of circumstances. I personally, not that I have a crystal ball, but I really think this is going to lead to more schools staying that way, because that has been a trend anyway over the years. I recall a few years ago, I don't remember how many now, when the University of Chicago was talking about going test optional, and the world just balked at that. Like, oh, how are they going to figure out who should be there? Given its very unique setting and the kind of students that they attract. And we have been in regular contact with U of C admission staff over the years. Like, okay, are you seeing a difference yet? Like, what's different about the pool, or how difficult was it to pick the students? And it has not been. They have all the material that they really need to determine who would be a good fit for their school. So I think a lot of the counselors who are doing this for the first time, they have many colleagues that are very experienced in doing the same.
Next question. Will teachers help students with their essays for college? Before I turn this question over to Ms. Ojigatu and Mr. Herbst, or excuse me, Mr. Nixon, my apologies. I would say yes. Senior English teachers historically have spent part of their time in their fall classes helping students work through essays. A lot of them work with the Common App essay, but a lot of them work with other essays that kids are constructing. So your children will get a chance to get some feedback from their English teacher regarding college essays. They can certainly reach out to their counselors, and then Ms. Ojigatu and Mr. Nixon will be running a college essay workshop.
Yes. So we'll be together again, Mr. Nixon, quite soon. And I do want to stress, in terms of the workshop, it's a little ways from now, with maybe 2 weeks, I think. What we often do in advertising to our kids is use it, especially for those who are stuck, don't know where to begin. It's a workshop, so there will actually be like hands-on writing time, writing drills. We'll talk about do's and don'ts of the essay process. For students who have a fully formed essay or have 7 different drafts of different questions from different essays, I wouldn't say the workshop is going to be the best forum for them. Then for those students, I would follow Mr. Herbst's early advice about getting that essay in front of different eyes of people that are trusted. hopefully parents would be on that list. Sometimes they're like, no, you're just going to say you like it just because you like me, or the opposite, like, so I think a range of eyes, maybe a teacher, maybe a peer. I've always suggested that to my students, like, you know what, have someone who really knows you read this essay and see if you are you're coming across as the person you are on paper. And that often leads to an interesting, conversation, like, well, you didn't say anything about this that I think makes you so awesome. So the kids are at different parts of the writing process, but we're all here, still virtually, and able to help.
I concur.
Yes. Ms. Johnson, can you get the next question?
Yes. Next question up. Does it make sense?
And are we good on time? Do we need to?
We are at 8:41, and I'm still showing 50 questions in the chat. Perhaps, sorry, we're going to talk amongst ourselves here for a second. Perhaps we should continue taking questions and for the next 15 minutes.
Right. Wrap it
And
up.
then any question that is not answered in the chat, we will record. We are definitely planning to send you the PowerPoint in an email and directions on how to link to this recording of this presentation. And in that email, we could also include the questions we don't get to by 9 o'clock and the answers to those questions.
And can
So
they
hopefully
still,
that will, panel, does that work for you guys?
yeah, can they still upvote their questions? So if there's some that rise to the top in the next 15 minutes, if you're super
Yes.
anxious about a question you want to answer, upvote them. Go for it.
Yes, and then they'll go to the top of our list.
Was it explained clearly? Perhaps I missed the bit about how to upvote. You raise your hand, I believe, or there's a method.
There's a little thumbs up that you click on underneath the question, and that allows you to upvote that question higher up onto the list.
Great.
Okay, does that sound good, panel?
Sounds
Okay.
good, thank you.
Next question, does it make sense that parents would take the primary responsibility for completing the FAFSA rather than the students attempting to complete it themselves?
Yeah, I'll answer that. It all depends on your family situation. I know of many students come from families where income is not discussed, where the tax returns are not for the children's eyes. And then other households where the child is doing the taxes. I was one of those, actually. So I did my own FAFSA back in the day. I think it should be a family experience, quite frankly. I think it's been addressed a couple of different times. This is a huge financial investment and a huge commitment. And I think that the students the following year are going to be the primary holders of those documents. They're the ones that, if they're taking out a student loan, for freshman year, that paperwork is going to come to them for the following year. It's going to be in their name. So I think it's an opportunity to teach your child or teach your children about being fiscally responsible. So why not just have like a family gathering around the computer and do it together.
I would add to that, it's hard to have those conversations about finance. And I imagine that it's going to be particularly harder this year for some families to have that conversation about finance as the pandemic has greatly impacted some household incomes. But I would encourage you to have conversations with your children about what the expectations are in terms of family contribution financially. There's nothing worse on the counselor end to have a student who gets into that dream school but gets absolutely no dollars at that dream school, and then they aren't able to go because financially it's not a possibility for their family. And that's fine. Sometimes you don't get your dream school because of finances, and as Mr. Herbst said at one point in the presentation, a lot of times it makes a whole lot of sense to take your financial safety and save that money for a graduate degree or for something else. But having those conversations about finances with your children now, help them make that step into adulthood, because they have to start paying attention to those kinds of things. I would strongly encourage it.
I would just add the backstory to that, of course, is the debt equation, which is exploding, as we know, in student debt. And to a kid, a lot of times, the difference between a $10,000 debt or 20 or 30, they're numbers. They don't have any idea, nor should they at this time understand how difficult it is to earn the money to pay for that. So I often tell the kids, all things being equal, mindful that they never are, follow the money, which is the back end underlying question, which bespeaks the question about who fills out the paperwork and how it should be discussed. And I agree with my colleagues' analyses on that.
Well, I was going to toss out another financial related question for the panel. Regarding financial aid and financial safety, is it common for schools to reduce a student's financial aid by the amount awarded through outside scholarships?
It can be. I can think of examples where it absolutely is the case. I think it also goes to whether it's a merit award they're getting sometimes, or whether they're getting an award based on need. And so does it affect the need, or is it strictly a merit? There are a lot of pieces of the puzzle. I know on our end, just to put this to rest, we are required by the IRS to report. We send the checks to colleges when they win a local scholarship award with the local OPR FHS Scholarship Foundation. So given that, and so a lot of times families hesitate, but the reality is it's pretty universal, but yet it's, again, to the college specific. I will say to those folks who have very specific financial aid questions, we had the very good fortune of having a very, a nationally acclaimed, candidly, speaker who comes on as a courtesy to us, and has even agreed to do it remotely in these difficult times. So those questions would be best directed to her in early October.
I think, yeah, and you made reference to scholarship organizations sending the monies directly to schools. There are other scholarships where the money might go directly to the student. And so the reporting is not required in the same kind of way. So it really is going to depend, again, on the kind of scholarship, and depends on the school's policies. And that's a question to ask up front. I wouldn't wait until after all the admissions come in and you're making decisions later. I think that's a fair question to ask up front. And in many cases, the students are going to be considered for scholarships upon submission of their application anyway, the scholarships from the institution. So that's another thing to think about. Okay.
All right, next question. Thoughts on two-year or community college options this year, given the uncertainty?
So one thought I didn't mention that I meant to, the Triton, the two-year college option at Triton also includes, there's a potential for serving as a Triton Scholars program student, for students who have, I believe it's a 3.35 GPA, it might be slightly higher, but 3.35 GPA and or test scores, not necessarily test scores that might match that. Students could apply to be a part of the Triton Scholars Program, which would be 2 years of a full ride at Triton on their way to completion at a four-year school. Most Triton Scholars intend to get a four-year degree and start out at Triton to save money or whatever it might be to earn those first 2 years. And that's one opportunity. There's also a Trustees Honor Scholarship. And there also is the opportunity if the student has a major that Triton does not offer, that they want to. I had a student last year that wanted to go into film. They couldn't afford to, given the pandemic and the costs of their college choices. So they chose to enroll at Triton, but they didn't have the film program at Triton that they needed. So they attended College of DuPage because the community colleges support each other and their programs if one college does not offer a student's need. So they attended College of DuPage to get credits towards their film degree, but paid Triton College rates. So, you know, even community college, we say that there's Triton College, but there's also the consortium of community colleges that support each other in a variety of ways. And it very much, I think, will be an ever increased option. Anywhere from 10 to 25% of our students go to community college on an average year, I guess more 15 to 25%. I expect those numbers will go up for a variety of reasons, including the pandemic. So definitely encourage that to be checked out fully. And that can be applied to at any time, the community college, added to the list.
I feel like I'm completely out of order. I apologize.
I had the benefit of not seeing the Q&A as the presenter, so I feel sorry for you.
I can answer a quick one on the list, Carolyn, while you find another
Yeah,
question.
please, thank you.
Someone asked the question, when will the transcript be available? So know that next week when your seniors are meeting with their counselors, we will have uploaded their most recent transcript, and that would include any courses that came in over the summer. We know a lot of your children were taking online courses at various through various programs and transferring those credits over to OPRF. So we want to make sure we're capturing all of the credits, and so that the GPAs are all impacted by all those A's that came in from those online courses. So your students will have access to an unofficial copy in their portfolio that they could see in Skyward. If we had them live in the building, we'd be handing them a hard copy. We can't hand them a hard copy, so it's going to be in the portfolio, and you should be able to download it and print it.
Okay.
You're up too.
Okay. I'm going to combine a couple. One of them was about if my child is already signed up for the October SAT date, should we be requesting a refund from College Board? And it was my understanding that we are not the host of any tests this fall at all.
No.
What's that?
No National Test Administration.
No national test, exactly. So if I'm understanding this question correctly, I am suggesting that you reach out to College, as they were supposed to contact families if they selected our school as their first choice and got assigned. Those assignments have been changed. So I would find out more about that from College Board. But more general question, if you are planning to sign up for any of these other September, Octobers, as long as it's affordable, I'd say go ahead and have them take the test if it happens. There's so much unknown. It might be canceled anyway, but if you're in one, then I'd say give it a shot. But I think the theme is pretty clear here that the reliance on testing is far diminished this fall, and I think we're going to see far more cancellations to come, quite frankly. And then there's another question that is again going to be addressed in our meetings with the students. And I want to reiterate something Mr. Herbst mentioned in the presentation. There are so many moving parts to this process. There is not one place where everything gets uploaded and taken care of, at least not on the student side. Internally, our teachers and the counselors and our secretaries are using Naviance as a vehicle to deposit our information, but we're all doing it in different ways. So I am uploading my letters for students and filling out required forms. Separately, teachers are uploading their letters based on request of kids, and it will be housed there in Naviance. Our secretaries are uploading the school profile and transcripts. So we've got all of these people uploading things that is confidential. The kids don't see the letters, they don't see the materials, but they do have to take ownership of making the requests for what they need and meeting the deadlines that they are after. So I think it's important for the students, obviously, to do the work, but if you have a disorganized young one that needs a little bit of help, maybe putting a little grid together, putting a spreadsheet together, or keeping whatever papers or even exist in order, whatever assistance, obviously, as a parent that you can give your child would be helpful. What we will miss this year is not being in person, where I can just run to a class and this is missing. get your book bag. It's in there. Give it to me right now. So we don't have that direct access in the same way, but you know, if you're helping with the organization on your part, and then obviously we know what's needed, so you know, we're going to help from our side.
All right, next question, and I'm going to pre-pitch this to Mr. Nixon and Ms. Ojigatu. Should students plan to answer how they've been impacted by the pandemic only to share significant circumstances that admissions would need to know as they evaluate the application? So just in terms of, I'm assuming that means to include that in maybe possibly an essay. So I'm gonna let you two take that one.
I have a couple thoughts, and based upon reading several articles and conversations I've had that are not special, but they're still inputs and anecdotal observations. Number one, remember that the Common App typically has a question about anything else we need to know about. So if there's something that really severely occurred and affected your family situation or the child's family situation as they're the applicant, then it's worth reporting. I have been counseled and I've read and I agree. I wouldn't necessarily make that the centerpiece of a major essay, because they also, what I read, which really resonated with me, was not only are the college admissions officers reading all these essays that may have to do with COVID, but they're also experiencing their own lives. So if they just lost a parent, they can't visit their elderly parent, they've got a child at home who doesn't have childcare, whatever it may be. There are a number of variables I'm not here to recite. The bottom line is they're experiencing this every day. So it's not even what we used to call a busman's holiday for them to read an essay about the same thing if it's more of the same. Having said that, if there's I liken it to the 2008 applicant pool when the financial crisis happened then, or even after preceding that, 9/11. There are lots of horrors and misfortunes that have befallen us over the years as a country and in the world. And there are times and places, if there's something specific that you feel is unique, by all means, you can also run it by the counselor, your counselor who might be able to help you frame it or contour it or present it or work through it. I mean, it's partly a growth process. So that's what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say pretty much the same. We've all been impacted in different ways, you know, so it might be very relevant as a primary topic for some students, you know, but in terms of, you know, school was canceled last spring. It was canceled everywhere. So the one thing that I do know admissions counselors are not paying that much attention to is second semester of junior year, because those grades came about in a wide variety of ways. You know, so anything a student wants someone who doesn't know them to know is important to be addressed in their writing. You know, so, and again, let your counselor know, you know, we can have those we're going to have our one-on-one conversations with our students, with our seniors about those very same things.
And one of our questionnaire questions is additional circumstances, so you can address it there with our questionnaire for counselors as well. So,
absolutely.
I think we have time for one more question before we close. Again, I want to thank you guys for coming and sticking with us for so long this evening. We appreciate that. We know you guys all have questions. We will make sure we answer these questions and get them out to you, the ones that we haven't been able to get to. So know that you should just keep your eye on your email in the coming days before the weekend, and we'll get something out to you. So last question kind of ties into the one we just had. A parent asks, upward trend on grades, question mark, including second semester junior year, question mark. I think that kind of feeds into what you guys were just talking about. Anybody want to take that?
yeah, I think, you know, there's some teachers that give tests as extra credit only if it helps. It's kind of like only if it helps. If you have a better grade point average your second semester junior year, that's going to be a great thing. But if it's lower than the rest of your semesters, I think there's going to be a assumed effect from the pandemic. So on a normal year, upward trend is good. And where does that semester play into the rest of what your transcript looks like? Because every transcript tells a story. And if you explained what admission representatives see in that story, whether it be bumps, whether it be consistency or inconsistency? Is there some aspect of your application or your recommenders that explain that story and speak to it? And so I think trends are going to be a little different this year, obviously for second semester, junior year. But if it helps you and it looks good, and for many of you, you had very strong grades at the end of third quarter, and those were the grades you couldn't get any lower than. Colleges don't necessarily know that. They just see your second semester grade from junior year, and for many of you, that was in good shape. But for others, you improved it. So it's not going to hurt you if it's better, but it's also not going to hurt you if it's less, if you've had a consistently strong 2.5 years and followed up by a consistently strong fall this term.
That's what I was going to add, is that this fall, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
No, go right ahead, Mr. Nixon. I'll chime in after that.
I was just going to say, I think that everybody was sort of shell-shocked last spring. I think there's still a lot that's uncertain, but the fact that we're able to have a viable, not preferable, but viable Zoom panelist with something we usually do live speaks to the fact that we've all become habituated and accustomed to a virtual communication, which isn't preferred necessarily, but is the state of affairs as we experience them. Similarly, the synchronous teaching and how students are interacting and attending to their studies this fall, I think will matter a great deal to show whether, to Mr. Herbst's point, it was a blip one way or another last spring, or is a consistent part of the story or a larger trend.
I would just add to what Mr. Nixon just said. I think, last quarter, we were in a state of emergency. And we left school and we had no idea how to do what we were about to do. And we got through it. This year, presumably, we have a little more stable situation. And I don't mean just us, but any school around the country. So I think colleges will be looking at this semester a little bit differently than they would be looking at last quarter. And again, it's viable, it's not preferable for sure. But I would appreciate parents and guardians sharing with their children how important it is for them to engage in their academics and engage in their classes. It's important not just for the grades and not just for earning credits to graduate from high school, but just for teaching them some resiliency in this tough time. And I get it, it's hard. I hate working in my basement. I don't like it. And I know that kids don't like it either, but it is what we have right now. And the resiliency that kids can develop in the situation, I think, is something that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. They're going to be the COVID generation. Oh yeah, COVID, that's just going to explain so many things in the coming years. But anything you can do on your part to encourage them to engage in those classes and do the best they can and reach out to their teachers and reach out to their counselors would be greatly, greatly appreciated. So Mr. Herbst, I was just going to say, I'll let you wrap up after you finish your comment.
As always, I want to end on a note of encouragement. But before I do that, I just want to send one quick thank you for two people. And I maybe mentioned in the beginning when I was getting started, so I may have missed it. But if we had not done so already, we would be completely remiss if we did not thank Teslin Sadowski and Christopher Schultens, I hope I pronounced both your names correctly, for behind the scenes making all of this magic happen, from the Q&A, from the PowerPoint going on there. They have been our unsung heroes and helped us well before this event occurred and throughout the entire evening behind the scenes, never asking for praise, but please, a virtual clap out for behind the scenes work they've done.
Thank you.
And I would say that to echo the COVID situation, the generation, what we don't know is the positive attributes of this generation. We talk about Gen X, we talk about the millennials, and everybody has positive and negative traits. But the COVID generation is really all of us, right? But we're all at a very different part of our life as we're going through this, a different life stage. We don't know the sort of resiliency traits that are already developing. As Ms. Johnson said, it was a state of emergency last spring. I think if anything, this fall semester is going to be of importance to colleges. And how did you adapt and respond and grow and change as a result of living through a pandemic? And what have you done differently, or how have you become stronger, had stronger roots in either your academic life or your personal life? How did you maintain your passions even though we were in the middle of a pandemic? What did you do to continue to enrich yourself and each other? How did you, serve your community and those in need? Any of those things still play out. Your personality traits, your passions, your love, the things that make you you can still play out. And if you are doing things that enhance those qualities and make those evident for colleges is really important. So to try to look at the ways in which you've grown through this and continue to. And remember that everybody at that table doing the admissions review of your application is also living through a pandemic. And think of how understanding we've all become of each other. No college is looking to close the doors because of a reason that might be because of this pandemic. So if anything, I think more doors will be opened in effect. A sum total of more doors will be open, and more possibilities will be had because of what we didn't know last spring when this all happened. And so what you know now can lead you forward. So thank you all for attending tonight, and know we are with you in spirit. We are with you virtually throughout this whole process from beginning to end. And we want to hear all about the goods and the bads, the acceptances, the rejections, the plan Bs, the plan Cs. We are here for every aspect, as we've always been, and in some cases even more so. And thank you for my co-panelists, Mr. Nixon, Ms. Johnson, and Mr. Jigatu, for fielding questions and for adding to the richness of what we had to share tonight. And I think the awkward moment has arrived, at which people leave our panel and people leave our presentation while we remain on and wait until everybody leaves. So, oh, there's some nice music. Thank you, Ms. Sadowski.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will.